Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Bruchim Habayim, welcome, and a special welcome to all of the guests who are here with us this morning. I stand in awe as I study Torah over the course of a week, trying to consider what to speak about at this moment. And I've expressed this to you before. There's an idea that has to do with the fact that such ancient stories are consistently and continuously renewed. Messages in our narratives that we have learned over the years again and again become very obvious and relevant as the world changes. We experience the world in different ways constantly. The messages can also be appropriate as our experiences change and evolve. It happened to me in a very profound way this week when reading Parshat Korach. Korach is placed by our tradition as a rather dangerous demagogue. He rebels against Moses and Moses' leadership with a language that has great popular appeal, we see. I remember as a younger rabbi reading this story, and I often was very curious as to why he was painted in a dark light, why he was seen as an evil personality, why was he killed? But as an adult now, and particularly over the last few years, I do see it differently. You see that his initial accusation against Moshe and Aaron was that they, as leaders, were acting as if they were holier than everyone else. And they complained about his leadership for a number of different reasons. Korach and his followers questioned his authority. And they questioned his authority from the tradition. They said that our tradition teaches us that every human being is holy. Every human being has divine worth, a tselem of Elohim, a spark of God in them. And so Korach asks, what makes you so special? Why do you think you and you alone can be the leader? And he causes great foment in the community just at the time when things were really bad in the community. There was a lot of unhappiness amongst the people after the years of wandering and the lack of food and all the challenges that the people themselves were facing. So he feeds into the people's dissatisfaction, a dissatisfaction that existed amongst them, particularly after the return of the spies, and an indication that now the people were being placed in harm's way. It was a dangerous time for the people. And so he sees the people's vulnerability and he plays into it. So as I said, as a young person, I would wonder, isn't he asking important questions? And isn't it important to question authority? For authority that goes without checks and balances is dangerous. And in the Torah just a couple weeks ago, we read about these two figures in the camp amongst Bnei Yisrael, Eldad and Medad, and they were prophesying in the camp, and people came to Moshe and they said, look at what they're doing. And Moses said, it's okay. Oh, should all the people be prophets? It's okay. It was as if Moses said, I want to share some of this burden of leadership with others. But this time the protest is different. And we know that the protest had to be different because of God's response. For the earth opened up and it swallowed up an entire group of protesters, Korach, Datan, and Abiram, and their 250 followers. So what's going on here? What did they do that was so horrible? What did they do that endangered the people in their future? And as you would imagine, the commentators spend a lot of time trying to answer just that question. One answer given, interestingly enough, was that Korach was, in fact, from the same family as Moshe and Aaron. Their fathers were brothers. And so Korach was just acting out of personal jealousy. Why was it that they should be the priests of the nation and he could only be a Levite? And we know that Korach has great oratory skills, or at least we can say he was an extremely persuasive man. His speech persuaded his followers to rise up against Moshe. And Moshe, we know, was in a chosen position by virtue of his history, for he stood up against Pharaoh. He led the people out of slavery. He brought the people to Sinai, and he received the law from God. There are commentators that say the real problem with Korach was his public repudiation of Moses and Aaron. And they say, people could disagree, but as we know, our disagreements should not be disagreeable. There are ways to disagree with people, and there are ways to manipulate. There are ways to disagree with people without shaming them, and there are proper ways to enter into debate. There are proper ways to argue. There are proper ways to correct others, and there are ways that create shame. You all know that you know people who will correct you from time to time in front of others. And the correction is not heard. It's not taken in because the critique is embarrassing. And there's something else here. And this may be the most important of all commentators, at least it moved me. In the Midrash, the rabbis say that Korach publicly impugned Moses' authority by asking him very creative questions about Torah. And on the surface, they seem like the questions that you might read in the Gemara. He said, since the Torah claims that tzitzit must be made with a blue thread, does it mean that a person who's wearing a blue shirt doesn't have to wear tzitzit? Sounds innocent enough, the question. On another question he asked, if there's a house that's filled with Torah scrolls, in which the words on the parchment of the Torah are the same as the words that we find in a mezuzah, does the house have to have a mezuzah? Sounds simple enough. The questions may seem interesting to someone engaged in what's known as pilpul, kind of the detailed conversations that seem pretty irrelevant and don't really make a difference in our lives. But that's not what Korach was doing, according to the rabbis. What Korach was doing there was ridiculing Moses and Aaron, and he was ridiculing the Torah, and he was ridiculing Jewish law. And I think that that's the essence of the derision that our tradition holds about Korach. It was that ultimately it did not have to do with his rebellion against Moses. It had to do with his disrespect for the law and thus disrespect for the order of the community. The commentators point out that Datan and Abiram and so many of their followers pitched their tents near Korach because he gave everybody a sense of power. When he spoke, you felt like you were important. And they began to believe his narrative about Moses and Aaron, and so they all became a part of Korach's story that made Moses look like a fool. And so he influenced large numbers of people who wanted to destroy the community. They wanted to destroy the structure of the community. All of the people who were with Moses. In today's parlance, we might say that these were the people, Korach and Datan and Abiram, who wished to drain the swamp. They wanted to change the structure of the community. And then this past week, I thought about the fact that what Korach was doing was actually trying to destroy the covenant with God. He was trying to destroy the Brit. I realize there's something very fundamental and basic and critically important in this narrative that can be read into the public disputes and desires for control and power, which we have seen in nations and politics throughout time. So let me explain a little bit further. We exist as a people because of a covenant, a brit. And the covenant, the most important covenant of all, was made between God and the people at Mount Sinai. And there we experienced revelation and we received the law. At Sinai we received Torah. Our story, our Torah, is the manifestation of God's will. Our Torah is God's conversation with us. Our Torah is our constitution. It is what ties us together as a people. It is our living covenant. And it is the reason that we exist as a people to this very day. It is the source of our story. It is the source of our law. It is the source of our morality. And this covenant is more important than any one person, any one teacher, or any leader. Now I want us to move forward in religious history. You know, when Christianity began, there developed a sense of a new covenant. Perhaps the concept originally came from the prophets, but the new covenant was a covenant of the heart. It was described as a covenant of love. And the new covenant said the law was no longer central. Rather, the Torah's law would be replaced by a faith. It was a faith in God in the flesh, as it were, and it was preached as a faith that was based on love. And so law was made subservient to faith in the people and institutions that promoted and expanded the faith. But the new covenant, although it created faithful followers, never created a unified people. The new covenant did not create a nation. And the new covenant was, unfortunately, abused, and it created a cause that was led by, very often, cruel tyrants, generals, and kings who abused people and abused people who were different, who enslaved people and destroyed swaths of population, all in the name of a new covenant. In our own history, we know how we suffered from that new covenant. There was an abuse of power over individuals and the masses by the powerful. There were populist leaders, often in power, because they had the capacity to create religious fervor and because they had the power of the community and the military behind them. Often they were charismatic leaders themselves. And perhaps this is what Korach had hoped to create and what made his rebellion not a moment of hope for the people, but one that almost destroyed us. Leaders need not only the capacity to unite a people, but also the humility to respect and stand for the law. Moses and Aaron remained steadfast to the law they were given. By the way, this notion of a new covenant was renewed again by the early pilgrims and settlers who came to America. And so what we see in all of our formative texts is this notion of a new covenant, and it's not the same as the New Testament. America was seen as a promised land once again. Its story paralleled the land of the ancient Hebrew people, the land of Israel. The new covenant in America was based on law, as established by its leaders at the time, a law and its documents that continue to have great validity to this day. Lyndon Johnson, in his first inaugural address, echoed the words from the early pilgrim and later the governor, John Winthrop, when he said the following, and these are such important words. They came here, the exile and the stranger, the brave but frightened, They came here to find a place where a man could be his own man. And they made a covenant with this land, a covenant that was conceived in justice and written in liberty, bound in union, bound like a book. It was meant one day to inspire the hopes of all mankind, and it still binds us. If we keep its terms, we shall flourish. So the new covenant was not just based on a feeling about leaders or a feeling about this land. It was based on the principles that were described in its founding documents. Johnson, like the Pilgrims way before him, and the founders of the nation, knew that the covenant would be rooted in the text of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. It had to be inscribed as law, and the law would be the guiding light for justice. George Washington, in his farewell address to the nation, which he drafted, by the way, as I was doing my research, I learned that he didn't write it himself. Washington drafted his farewell to the nation with Alexander Hamilton. And he warned our people of a few things. He warned our people about unity, and he warned our people back then about the divisiveness of placing party over nation. For he said our nation is rooted in a system of law, and it's constitutionally based. We cannot lose sight of that. And you know that when Washington's term of office was coming to a close, the people, they clamored for a king, just like in the Haftorah today. And he refused, for he understood how the nation would be preserved. It was with a nation, with a system of law that had checks and balances, rooted in an authoritative, not human being, but constitution. We would not have a king. So now let's get back to Korach. We've learned that although his complaint and rebellion on the surface seemed to be framed as a protest against Moses and Aaron, it wasn't. It was a rebellion against the system, and it was driven by his ego. For he wanted to destroy the Torah. He wanted the power. And with his charisma, he made a claim, and he was followed by a loyal mass that he was the true power. Just follow him. He was above the law. My guess is that if he saw what was coming, he would have made the following claim. Korach would have said, it's not just Moses, it's the system that's rigged. And the law, justice itself, was weaponized against him. But it was Korach who was his worst enemy, not Moses and not the law. And what we read, what we, the readers of Torah, see and are given hope to believe is that at the end of the day, there is a truth in our tradition. We point to our texts. We point to what we consider to be the Word of God. In democracies, we see that it's concretized and rooted in a law or a constitution, a system that's bigger than any one person or any one group of people, be it Moses and Aaron, or be it Korach, or any demagogue, or any politician, or any judge. The system is meant to protect freedom and the rights of human beings and the continuity of the nation. It places limits on human power and strengthens the common good. It preserves justice and it cares for all, the powerful and the powerless, the rich and the poor, no matter what race or faith one is part of, no matter one's origin or gender. And that is why there is law. And I know there are people that see Judaism as a tradition of justice, where other traditions are about love. And the reality is that Judaism is about love that's protected by our justice. And that's why there is a law. And the truth is intended to preserve freedom. And it preserves us as a people. and it preserves this country, these United States of America also. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom.